Hey, this is Jamie from Stonemaier Games, and today I'm going to talk about games that feature action rondelles. This is when you have a circular track, or maybe a square track, but it's essentially a circle. You're going around a track, selecting different actions or benefits until you get to the end of that track, and then sometimes the round will end, or you'll just keep going around that track over and over again on your own accord, gaining those benefits and taking those actions. I'm thinking about this topic a lot because over the last few months, maybe even longer than that, I've been trying to design a game like this because I really like one-way action selection tracks. But the feedback I kept getting from playtesters is that the game felt repetitive, which made me want to make this video because inherently a rondelle game is kind of repetitive. You're going around the same track over and over again, essentially repeating what you did before, and there may not even be that much sense of a progression on the track if you're just starting over and going around again. I'm going to name some great examples that differ from that, but it made me think about it, and so I wanted to talk about it on today's video. And I should clarify before I jump in that this is a little different than a Mancala, although I do have some Mancala examples on this list. I have one that still applies, I think, to this rondelle mechanism. But I didn't include Crusaders, and I didn't include one of my favorites, Terra Mystica. Terra Mystica has a little rondelle where you're moving magic around. I think they call it power in the game. In this Mancala is you pick up a certain number of tokens in Terra Mystica and you move it to another magic pool. And there are benefits you can gain from that pool, but it isn't quite the same as a rondelle. It's in the same family, but not quite the same. So I didn't include that on this list. So let's start with number 10. Maracaibo. This is a game from one of my favorite designers, Alexander Pfister, and you are essentially sailing a ship around the rondelle, taking actions, filling orders, and doing other things, fighting battles as you move your ship around this action selection track, this circular action selection track. A few things that Maracaibo does unique with this rondelle is that there is a limit to how far you can sail. I believe it's 7 spaces, maybe 6 or 7 spaces, and when you get to the end of it, you stop and you wait for all other players. And so you want to bide your time a little bit, but at the same time, there are certain actions that you can take along that rondelle that are better if you moved farther to get to them. I think my favorite thing about the Maracaibo rondelle is that within this circular track that you're using your ship for, there is a land area, and you kind of have to see the board. You'll see it at the bottom of the board, hopefully in a photo that you'll see on the screen right now. There's a land mass at the bottom where if you have your ship on that action space, you can, instead of moving your ship on your turn, you can move your explorer along a one-way action selection track. It's not a rondelle, but it's kind of similar to it, where you gain other benefits in that exploration area. That to me feels really good. I like moving the ship around. That's fun. There's some important things, like that's the core of the game right there. But it's really fun for me to get my ship to that land area and go exploring along that path and see what I can get along that path. So I think that's really clever to have a rondelle with kind of a spin-off area off to the side. And that's why Maracaibo is my number 10 game on this list. And number 9 is Viscounts of the West Kingdom. Viscounts uses an action rondelle as well, where you have a big meeple on this modular 6-sided board, and you're moving that meeple a few spaces clockwise around the rondelle and gaining benefits from where you end up. There are a bunch of different benefits that you can gain. I won't go into all of them, but my favorite aspect of this rondelle is that each of those sections of the hex-shaped board has a pile of cards on it, and the top card of those piles is always face up. And when you're on one of those rondelles, one of the things that you can do when you're on a specific rondelle is either gain the card from the top of that rondelle, or there's one action that you can take where you can gain the benefits of the card on that rondelle, but you don't actually add that card to your deck. I like both of those mechanisms, but overall, I just really like the idea that it's deck building with location-specific cards. If there's a specific card somewhere on that rondelle that I really want in my deck, or I want the ability of it, I need to go to that location to get it. I think that's fairly unique within deck building games. Most deck building games have kind of an abstract card row where you can always have access to these cards. I really like that the cards are associated with a specific space on the rondelle that you have to get to. You have to move there and visit this person, essentially, in Viscounts of the West Kingdom. So that's why this is number 9 on my list. At number 8, we have one of the games that I own, and that is The Red Cathedral. In The Red Cathedral, one of the core action selection systems, let's see if I can pull up the board here. Yeah, here we go. Is the rondelle itself. There are a couple different actions you can do in your turn, but this is one of the core things. You have this rondelle here, and there are different colored dice that are going to be scattered around this rondelle. They're D6 dice. And what you will do on your turn if you take this type of action is you'll pick up one of the dice from that section. So say I have a number 3 die right here. I'll pick that up and I'll move it 3 spaces around the track. You can manipulate that distance a little bit by spending some coins, but by default, you are moving the die, the number of spaces that show on that die. And then the area where it ends up, you'll gain the core benefit, which you can see is modular. It's not shown here. It's modular for each game. You'll gain that benefit a number of times equal to the total number of dice here. And so it's a really fun spatial puzzle where you're constantly looking around to see, okay, which benefits do I want? And how can I get them multiple times based on the die that I need to move and the number of dice that are already on that benefit. After you gain that benefit, you will take all the dice in that section and you'll roll them, so the numbers will change on the dice, adding some variability to the game over the course of the game itself. Some more puzzly aspects to it. There are also some other benefits you can get. There's another modular benefit here that you can gain in each of these quadrants. But I really just like the idea of moving the die the right number of spaces so that it can get to a benefit you want where there are already other dice, so you can get it multiple times. That feels really good. That's why the Red Cathedral is my number 8 Rondel game on this list. At number 7 on the list, oh no, I didn't grab it. I'll grab it right now. Here we go. The number 7 game on this list is Merchants of the Dark Road. In Merchants of the Dark Road, you are moving around a pretty small rondel on the board. The rondel, okay. My board's at the bottom of this box, so I won't show it to you, but I'll show you the pretty box. Art by Andrew Bosley. You're moving around a pretty small rondel on the board. And the number of spaces is dictated a little bit by the action selection system. There's this dice system that you're kind of manipulating each turn, or moving some dice around to figure out how far around the rondel that you want to move. I would say it's interesting in the Merchants of the Dark Road because the rondel doesn't feel like a huge consequence of the game. Like the game is basically saying you have access to most of these spaces on any given turn. And so it has a little bit less of an impact on the game, but I do like the idea how it's tied to the theme, where you are a merchant moving around this area of the world, trying to gather resources and fill orders and go adventuring and gain and make things and attract people. But the movement system of it, rather than having worker placement, which this game could have done, where you're placing workers on and off the board, I think thematically that works really nice. And that's why I wanted to mention it, because the theme of a rondel kind of represents you yourself, your caravan, your character, whoever you are, remaining in the world and moving around, opposed to worker placement where you're pulling things on and off the board. So, and just in general, I really enjoy Merchants of the Dark Road, so that's why I put it at number 7 on this rondel list. At number 6, I have a game that I kind of debated putting it on here because this is very solidly a Mancala mechanism, but Trajan, I think that's the correct way to say it. I used to say Trajan, but I think it's Trajan. In Trajan, each player has their own little Mancala / rondel, where you are picking up each of the cubes in a certain section of that rondel, and you're dropping off one cube at a time, clockwise, and then where the last cube drops, you'll gain that action. So there are, I believe, 7 different actions along that rondel that you can potentially gain. Each action corresponds to a mini game on the game board itself. So I really like that puzzle, like which cubes do you want to pick up and move them how far. Basically, you're looking at which action do I want to take, and then you're backtracking to a space that has a number of tokens that can get you to that action. But on top of that, and this is the reason that really elevates Trajan, is that each of those actions has a different color associated with it as well. And if the last token, the last cube that you drop on that space is the same color as that action itself, you gain a special bonus. If I recall correctly, those bonuses are modular, but it wouldn't even matter really either way. You're gaining a special bonus based on the exact cube that you're placing there. I think that's really clever. So not only is it an action selection system, but you're getting a bonus from it. And this is kind of similar to the Red Cathedral in that there's a puzzly aspect as to how can I get this benefit? How can I take this action that I really want? But how can I also maximize it and make it even better based on a number or color? I think that's really clever about Trajan. That's why it's my number 6 game on this list. And number 5 is Great Western Trail, a highly acclaimed game where there's an ongoing rondel. So you're kind of moving your herd of cattle throughout these different action spaces, these different tiles and different actions on the board. You can move, I believe, up by default up to 3 spaces until you get to Kansas City, where you get to gain some money from the cows that you brought to Kansas City that are in your hand when you get there, because it's a deck building game as well. There's some other things you do in Kansas City, and then on your next turn, you start over back at the beginning. And so there is no round structure to Great Western Trail, which I really like. You are kind of determining your own personal rounds as you go around and around. Now, I talked about at the beginning of this video how Rondel games can end up being a little repetitive, but I think Great Western Trail counters that partially by the deck building, but also partially because players themselves are building the board as they go. There are a few action spaces by default on the board at the beginning of the game, but players, as they play, are building new actions. They're putting new tiles on the board itself, which slows down all players. All players are also upgrading how fast they can move, but it slows down players. It gives players more actions, more options to choose from. And not only are they good for you when you choose those options, but also for the player that built that tile, they get a benefit when you go there as well. So I really like this. This is a great counter to the idea that Rondel games are by default repetitive because you're going around and around, because every time you go around, the actions themselves are growing, they're expanding. Your decision space is expanding in Great Western Trail, and that's why it's my number 5 game on the list. I think that's a really clever Rondel mechanism of adding new Rondel spaces as you play. And number 4 is Teotihuacan. This is the spiritual successor to one of my favorite games, Tzolk'in. And Teotihuacan, which I always mispronounce, you'll have to excuse that, or I would appreciate if you excuse that. This game it creates some Rondel puzzles through a couple different mechanisms. Partially is the random setup of the tiles. So there are, I believe, 8 or 9 big tiles, big action spaces that go around the board that you set up at the beginning of the game. And so just by default, every game is going to be a little different based on the random order that these tiles come out in. So that adds variability to the game, but it doesn't necessarily add variability within the game. With that comes from the dice themselves. So on any given turn, you're going to pick up one of your dice, and you're going to move it up to 3 spaces, I believe, around this action rondel. And you'll then gain the benefit where that die ends up. And each tile has essentially a little spreadsheet on it saying, here's the benefits if your die is numbered 1 or 2, here are the benefits if it's 3 or 4, or 5 and 6. The benefits get better and better. And at the end of your turn, you have to increase the age of your die. It increases from a 1 to a 2, or a 2 to a 3. And that's where the variability within the game comes in, because the benefits that you're gaining from each of these tiles change based on the numbers on the dice themselves. And so even though you're going around and around in a circle with these dice that you have on the board, the numbers of those dice are changing, so the benefits are changing. And also, you're not only just going around and around with one token, because you have multiple dice on the board. So that, I think, adds to the variability as well within each game. That doesn't make it not feel repetitive. You're not just moving the same token, you're moving multiple tokens, and the power levels of those tokens are changing throughout the game. So that's why this is number 4 on my list, Teotihuacan. And number 3 on the list is Heaven and Ale. Heaven and Ale is a beer brewing game where you are moving around a rondel, of course, per this list. And it's the style of rondel where you get to the end of the track and you stop there and wait for all the players. Because at the beginning of each round, you have to seed the track with different benefits. And this is where the variability comes in Heaven and Ale. The benefits on the track are not set, or most of them are not set. The vast majority of them are tokens that you're putting down, random tokens that you're putting down on different slots to define the benefits of each section of the track that round. And also in Heaven and Ale, there's no limit to how far you can move. On your first turn, each round, you can move all the way to the end of the track if you wanted. But you don't want to do that because you'd miss out on all those great benefits. So I really like the variability where you have the decision space, you have the option, the agency to choose how far you want to move. If there's a benefit way up on the track that you want to get, you can get that benefit if you move that far, but you're giving up all the benefits that came before it. In addition to the benefits being random each round. It does require a round structure to do this because you need some point in the game to reset all those different benefits, but it works in Heaven and Ale, and it feels really good to see what's out there and to have a different puzzle each round. And also, not only are those benefits coming out each round, but the value of those benefits to you is changing each round based on how your personal player board has evolved over the course of the game. Really nice sense of progression there to Heaven and Ale. That's why it's my number 3. And number 2 is a classic 2-player game, and that is Patchwork. In Patchwork, you create the rondel at the beginning of the game. And the rondelle in Patchwork is all of these polyomino pieces that you spread out in a giant circle around the central board at the beginning of the game. And on your turn, you're taking a shared token and moving it up to 3 spaces clockwise around that rondelle and picking a polyomino piece. So like the piece that you pick is the space where, the empty space where this action selection token ends up. And it's not, I guess it's not exactly action selection. You're essentially choosing the puzzle piece based on this giant rondelle. And having that wide open decision space of knowing that all of the tiles are out there. There's no randomness once those tiles are out there. You know exactly where all the tiles are. And over the course of the game, you'll realize I really need that specific tile. I need to make sure that I get it once we get around to that part of this giant polyomino rondelle. That's part of the decision space. And also, just on a micro level, I like that you can only choose from 3 pieces in front of you. It gives you agency over the choice that you're making, but it also lets you know exactly what choices your opponent has available to them on their next turn. There's also deeper decisions in Patchwork about which polyomino pieces you're choosing and the impact of those choices. But in general, I just really like that all of the benefits of the entire game, all of these pieces are there from the very beginning. You can see them all. And then you make these little micro choices during the game to move around the track with a shared piece. Unlike many of these other games, you are sharing these pieces, this one piece, with your opponent, which creates some interesting decisions as well based on what you want or what you think they might want. That's Patchwork at number 2. My number 1 game, though, my number 1 Rondelle game that you've seen probably mentioned on the list is Glenmore 2, Glenmore Chronicles. This is a wonderful Rondelle game. Also, let's see, show it on the back of the board here. Yeah, so you have this board with tiles that you're putting out, and you're constantly refreshing those tiles. Every time you choose one, you're adding another tile to the end of the track. And similar to Heaven and Ale, on your turn, you are choosing any tile anywhere ahead of you. So you can jump forward as far as you want. You're gaining that tile, you're adding it to the tableau, and you're activating the benefit on that tile and all the tiles around it. Whole other mechanism there, but very satisfying. But I love this ability to see all these tiles that are out there and to jump forward to the exact tile you want. But by doing so, you're giving up all the tiles behind you, and you're giving the other players behind you lots of time to take to gain those tiles, because the player whose turn it is the player who is furthest in the back. That's a twist that we haven't seen on too many of these other games. Usually it's turn by turn, but in Glenmore 2, your turn comes around only when you are the player who is furthest furthest in the back on this rondelle. I really like that too, because every time you make a decision, you're giving up other tiles to other players, even though there might be a tile that you really, really want. These tiles are staggered into different like stacks, and so the game designer has control over which tiles come out in the first round, second round, third round, and fourth round. But the order in which they come out is completely random, so you're shuffling up all these different stacks of tiles. All in all, too, I rate this so high because I just really, really enjoy playing Glenmore 2. But this action rondelle, this tile benefit rondelle is really, really satisfying. Everything looks good. Everything is tempting. And you just have to decide how far do I want to go and what do I have to give up to get that tile. And what am I giving to other players by jumping ahead to a higher tile, because they're going to get all these different actions along the way if they want it, if they can afford it. Glenmore 2, wonderful game. My number 1 favorite rondelle game. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below about your favorite rondelle games, why you think they work and why they aren't repetitive, even though you're going around and around. Obviously in Glenmore 2, the tiles are changing every round, so that adds a ton of variability to the game. And they're ramping up from round to round because they are staggered into those different stacks. But yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below about these games, your favorite rondelle games, and why, and games where you've seen rondelles work really well and not feel repetitive, and why you think that's the case. Thanks, and I look forward to chatting with you in the comments below.